Is it showing up?
I'm looking.
I think so. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Kerri Paget from Courageous Parents Network. I'm the community manager and also a bereaved mom. You may have seen some of my videos on the video library. And today I'm sitting here with Nancy Frumer Styron, and we're going to talk about anticipatory grief. Nancy?
So hi, I'm Dr. Nancy Frumer Styron, and I'm a psychologist. I'm also the clinical director at the Children's Room, which is a bereavement center in Arlington, Massachusetts. And I've been working with Courageous Parents Network actually since the beginning.
And for those of you who haven't been on Facebook Live before, if you're here right now, you can write in comments. If you have anything to ask as we're talking, comments, questions, we'll get to them as we can. And we'll just get started. So Nancy, I think for a lot of us who have experienced anticipatory grief, it kind of just happens and unfolds, and we don't always know the name, like how to name it. I know for myself, I started thinking about a lot of things that we might miss out on, or how our life would be different, really from the time Kai was diagnosed. Can you just explain exactly what anticipatory grief is?
So anticipatory grief has to do with grief that happens, and grief meaning all the different feelings, sadness and confusion and expectations and memories all happen before the person actually dies. That we often go through all those feelings the minute we know, and you just shared, even from the minute of diagnosis, all the things that are not going to happen, all the expectations that you had that you're now realizing are not going to be fulfilled. And anticipatory grief happens often both for the patient, the person who is going through that. Now, depending on how old that person is, that level of awareness is different, and happens for the other people who are the caregivers, often the parents, sometimes the siblings, sometimes the grandparents, other people who now have this information that what they thought life would be like is not going to be the same. And that grieving for all those losses starts even before somebody's actually died.
Yeah, I remember for us, like, Kai was too little to really understand what was going on. So I don't think he necessarily experienced that. But I definitely remember for me, the way I reacted, especially at diagnosis and at times when things were kind of getting worse or shifting or different decision making, I was the type of person who kind of had to think about all of it, look 10 steps ahead, explore all the options. And sometimes for some of my family, or even Kai's dad, sometimes that was frustrating, or, they didn't understand it because they were just trying to be hopeful, or they were thinking about different issues than I was.
Right. And so it shows up in all different kinds of ways. For some people, it's all the things about the fact that the person's going to die. What's that going to look like? What do I need to do? How do I prepare the child? How do I prepare myself for that? Kind of all those things I now need to plan for, sort of when we're anticipating something, there's a sense of, okay, what do I need to do to plan for? And for other people, they don't want to go there, to be honest. I mean, that's the other thing that happens, which is I heard the information, and for some people it's like, that's not going to happen, that's not going to happen. For other people, it's, well, maybe it's going to happen, but I'm not doing that now. I can't think about it, I don't want to deal with it. And in some cases, you had to deal with it, and sometimes other people around the person don't have to deal with it, so they keep going forward. It doesn't mean that in the dark of night or in the early morning, or when they actually sit with it for a minute, that they don't think about it. They probably do, but there are some times when you have to do the planning as well as really think about, what's this going to mean? Do I have to think about funeral arrangements? Do I have to think about where this is going to happen? All those things start to come up, and there's a lot of fear about that, and fear of planning for this. How do I do this? How do I be with my child and be thinking about this at the same time, which is the other piece. Like, now I'm realizing all the things we're not going to do, and I don't want to just sit in that, because I actually, right now, my child is still alive, whatever that means, and how you balance those two things out. So there's a lot of knowing and not wanting to only be in that fear, sad place. because in that moment, something hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, and it's interesting how it kind of fluctuates over time, even within one person. Like I very much in the beginning and throughout Kai's illness felt like I was the type of person who had to like dive into everything and explore everything as it was coming. But then later when we actually knew it was getting closer to the time that he was going to die, and people were trying to help me with some of the preparations and planning, like funeral planning and things like that, I was like, no, I'm not there yet. Even though this whole other time before that, I felt like I was ready to face everything head on. When it came to actual decision making, it like really shifted for me, and other people kind of had to take that on for me. So
grief isn't linear. It's sort of like a spiral. We go in and out of it, and anticipatory grief is the same. Sort of 1 minute I'm there, I've got a plan, I'm thinking about all these things I've got to do. And then that sort of the moment sometimes it becomes more real, it's sort of, I'm good. I'm just going to do this moment. I'm just going to be in this situation, but I'm actually not going to go there. But that's what grief is like. You go in and out of it. And when we think about the person who's dying, when they're old enough to be aware of that, they also go in and out of that. Siblings go in and out of that. 1 minute it's like, what's happening? And there are a lot of fears. And what do you mean you won't be here for my birthday, or you're not going to be here for Christmas or Hanukkah, or this isn't going to happen. And the next minute it's sort of like, okay, well, let's go get ice cream. And so that balancing of I'm not ready yet, oh my gosh, I have to get ready, is sort of how grief works. It's definitely a spot you sort of come back to it, then you go away from it, then you step back into it.
Can you talk a little bit about like other, like sort of earlier on when we might not exactly know, yes, there's an imminent timeline. I think for a lot of people, when I was first experiencing what I now know to be anticipatory grief, I had no idea that that's what I was experiencing, but I felt like I was really having these feelings, didn't know who to say it to, and then kind of feeling guilty about having those feelings and not knowing that it was actually pretty normal for a lot of parents.
So it's the interesting thing about anticipatory, right? About anticipation, which is you're thinking about things that often you feel like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't be thinking about this. Either I shouldn't be thinking about it because it hasn't happened, or I shouldn't be thinking about it because I don't want to make it happen, right? Which is the other part of that. And that anticipatory grief shows up in a lot of different ways. So it isn't just our thoughts. It shows up physically. We might be really tired. We might be really revved up and have to do. It shows up physically, sometimes in getting sick. Sometimes people hear information and they start to take it in, and you might literally feel like you just want to go throw up, or people feel really sick kind of on almost in a chronic way. There's nothing physically wrong per se, but grief goes into the body as well. Sometimes it happens spiritually. There's a crisis of faith in either direction. Why is this happening to me? If you believe in God, not everybody does, but if you do, why is this happening to me? Or there's a need to say, I've got to get sort of more committed. I have to get more religious, or I have to do something to change the way that I'm feeling. So it shows up in a lot of ways. And often people either don't know what it is, or they don't want to admit to it because they're afraid, actually, if I tell you that I'm already thinking about this, I'm already thinking about what's it going to look like when he dies. I'm already thinking about a funeral. People are like, you don't want to think about it. You need to stay hopeful. Or you don't want to think about it because you're going to make it happen sooner. And that idea of magical thinking, which, child development wise, we always say happens between ages 3 and 5, in fact happens lifelong. And so we often are worried that if we think it, we make it happen. Or if we think it now, it's going to make it happen sooner. And there really isn't a causal relationship, but we can't sort of help the things that arise. So actually naming it and talking to somebody, and we'll get to a point where we talk a little bit about how people cope with anticipatory grief, is really important, because it can feel really both crazy making or isolating.
Yeah.
Right? That's
how I felt, I think, and that's what I was just going to ask you. I think for me, when I started really having those feelings, and early in diagnosis, I was pretty vocal about some of these thoughts, and then sort of understood that the reaction I was getting was maybe not what I was looking for. So I felt comfortable at first saying these things, but then I realized pretty quickly that it was hard for other people to hear me say these things. And then I sort of retreated and became isolated with those feelings. What suggestions do you have for people who are starting to feel these things but don't exactly know what it's all about and where to put it and who to talk to about it?
Right. And sometimes the people closest to us are not always the people who can hear it, because people want to remain hopeful. They don't really want to believe this is going to happen. And they're afraid that if they go there with you, that you're going to get more sad or more tired or more distressed, rather than chances are if you'd had somebody who said, it would have been actually quite helpful. So figuring out who are the other people, literally, whether you're watching videos on CPN to know that other people feel the way you do, or you go and you seek out professional help. It might be saying something at the hospital, or if you're working with hospice, depending on kind of who you're working with, just saying, I'm already beginning to think about these things, so that people who have this experience can normalize it for you. Otherwise, you don't have an opportunity to feel like, is this normal or not? Maybe I shouldn't be thinking about these things. It's wrong to be anticipating my child's death. It's not wrong. It's a natural situation. We live sort of past, present, and future sometimes all at once, and we can't help thinking about that. So one of the ways that coping with anticipatory grief is really, I really can't stress it enough, is actually talking to other people, is actually seeking out, and it might be professional help, it could be therapy, but just being able to find people, and as I said, sometimes it's outside family who you can talk with.
Yeah, I definitely think for me, once I learned that this was a difficult conversation for other people, and my thoughts about it started shifting too. Like you said, I had times where I felt like I could say these things, and then I had other times where I felt like I pulled that back and felt more hopeful, or was in a space where I was thinking about other things. I think for me, as it got closer to the end, I started really reaching out, looking for resources like CPN, which didn't exist at the time, and found some of the reduction in isolation from other bereaved parents.
Yes.
Which, is now really helpful on Courageous Parents Network, that we can see those things.
The other thing that's really important is thinking about self-care, for example. So knowing that you may want to do it all, but figuring out who are the right people. And again, sometimes it's family, they're the right people, and sometimes it's not, to come in and actually support you, even if you need a break. And a break may mean, I need to just go outside and see what it's like outside. A break might mean I need to go cry somewhere, but I don't want to do that here. And while it's exhausting to be crying, it also sometimes is a real release. So some basic self-care is really important, talking to other people. And the other part is figuring out, because you go in and out of the sort of sad, fearful place into both the hopeful place, but also just the present, what it means to make memories, whatever that means, just sometimes to be with the person who's dying. And for older children, and certainly for adults, finding out sort of what do they want to do. And it might be, I just want to go get ice cream. I just want to go outside. For younger children, it might be you just want to take him outside. You just want to go do something, so that down the road, when there really is a death, you also have an experience of those memories, that you weren't steeped in anticipatory grief every minute, which fortunately we're not. We tend to go in and out of it. That's the good news. And to be able to really think about connecting with other people around the anticipatory grief, but also connecting with the person who's dying, so that you are really creating stories and memories. And sometimes it's 5 minutes where you make a decision, I'm just going to do this for 5 minutes. I have plenty of other things to think about and lots of things to worry about, but not right now. That kind of thing serves you in a really important way later down the road, in terms of the other kind of grieving that occurs, or the additional grieving that occurs. So I don't know whether we have some questions from people.
Have any questions right now?
Okay.
One thing that comes up a lot with parents who are connecting with us from on CPN, as a community manager, I get to talk to a lot of parents, and I think the whole reason why we're doing this talk tonight is because the anticipatory grief, actually naming it, is just, I feel like, one of the things that we get the most response on. because it's like these really complicated, confusing, sometimes isolating feelings, to actually put the words to it has, I think, been really helpful for a lot of people.
I think the other reason it seems to be, I mean, it's interesting to think about it being a popular topic, if
Yeah.
you will, is that people feel guilty feeling those feelings. That people are sort of like, I should not be thinking about my child's funeral. Nothing's happening right now. Well, the reality is that's easy to say, but the minute you know that this is a life-limiting illness and that the likelihood is that the child's going to die, you can't help but go there. And different people are in different places. So also keeping in mind that in a relationship or within a family, anticipatory grief may be true for one person in one form, it may show up in one way, and in another parent or another person in the family, it shows up in another way. You know, I've often sat with couples and one person says, I didn't want to admit this, but I've been planning my child's funeral from day one. Yeah. And the other parent's shocked, sort of like, I'm not there, but I'm exhausted and I feel sick all the time, right? So that it shows up in different ways, even within a family. But the guilt about thinking about those things, especially when you have people around you going, be hopeful, so maybe something will work out, we'll figure it out, or don't worry about it now. It's going to happen later. You don't have to worry about it now. But you can't, sometimes you just can't help it. And you're also trying to prepare yourself. I think the other point that's really important for, particularly for family members, particularly for parents, and sometimes for siblings, is what, you know, what I would call mastery. Sort of the more I can do this, the more I can think about this. You don't have to go there 24/7, but the more I can do this, the more I can begin to master it a little bit. Are you ultimately prepared for when it happens? No, you're not. Nobody's, I mean, you can't pretend like you know what's going to happen until it actually happens. But beginning to actually feel those feelings and learn what it's like to talk to people, or learn what it's like to notice those feelings and not, and even whether it's guilt, whether it's fatigue, whether it's fear, whether it's the need to plan, the need to make memories, is a way that we help begin to master this. Like, this is going to happen. I may not know when, I may not know exactly what it's going to look like. I don't know what it's really, really going to feel like. But if I can actually sit myself in some of this, even when it feels yucky, I actually am better able ultimately to deal with things. And I think long term, I think people cope better if they've been willing to kind of own and acknowledge some of this anticipatory grief.
Yeah. I felt really thankful when it was all, when everything was over, that I had the instinct to do that. I think reaching out and learning, for me, like, I had to know all of that information. Right. So Kai didn't have any siblings and he wasn't old enough to really be that aware. But when the patient, the child, is experiencing these things for themselves, what is that like? Because I didn't really experience that.
Yeah, it can be really, I mean, it can be hard for the person who knows they're dying, and it can be really hard, particularly, I would say, for the parents. Sometimes there are just a lot of questions. What's it going to be like? Is it going to hurt? Who's going to be there? Am I going to be alone? And then there's some realizations. I'm not going to graduate from high school. I'm not going to go to college. I'm not going to get married. And that realization is incredibly painful, both for the person who's experiencing it and particularly, I would say, for the parents and sometimes the siblings. And at the same time, it affords incredible opportunities to have conversations about what do they want? What's a bucket list? You know, I spend time with a lot of teenagers who are like, okay, you know, here's my bucket list. I want to get all my friends and we're going to the beach. You know, I'm not going to turn 21, so can I have my drink now? You know, and some of them are really small things, and some of them are just about spending time with family. And again, it depends, you know, how physically able or not is a particular child. But being able to have those conversations, and for parents to know that kids can have these conversations, which I think is really important. Like, we shouldn't talk about it. We don't want to make it worse. We don't want to make it sad. But if they know they're dying and nobody's talking about it, it's way scarier. It's much harder to feel like they have support. Just like we talked about when you're going through anticipatory grief as a parent, please find support. Please go find out the places where it's okay to talk about it. The same is true for kids who are older as well. And again, especially for kids, and depending upon where they are age-wise in terms of even their cognitive capacity, 1 minute they're steeped in it, and then they want a peanut butter sandwich.
Yeah.
And it's totally fine. You know, I mean, sometimes a little jarring, I think, when you're the adult, like, wait, we're just in this heavy conversation and now we're off getting, you know, fruit and ice cream. But I think the fact that you really are available and that kids have permission to talk about that, and it doesn't mean you don't sort of go in the back room and cry afterwards, but you have given permission. You said, yeah, this is really hard, and you're already thinking about it. I'm already thinking about it. We can actually talk about this.
Be willing to go there with them.
Be willing to go there, and be willing also to then find out what they want, so you can create the memories that you know they wanted, because that serves the surviving family members also. You know, we talked about it. We knew what they wanted. That includes sometimes kids planning their funeral. Here's the music I want. Here's who I want to be invited. All kinds of things become really important. Are they easy conversations? No, but they're a whole lot better than not knowing. And as a parent, really wanting to be there and be available, and sometimes to soothe your child. If you're not willing to talk about it, it's not comforting. If you're willing to talk about it, even when it's hard, it sends the message that we're going to do this together.
Yeah, it really does end up turning into and becoming a quality of life issue at the moment too. Like when we're able to have those conversations, when the kids are able to make those decisions, that day feels better. They have more control and more agency over what's going on with them.
And kids have great radar. So when they think you're not willing to talk about it, you're not going to be the person they come to. And when you think about it, particularly as a parent, you know, you're the person you want them to come to. You don't really want them to sort of be talking. I mean, it's fine if they're talking to the nurse at 3 a.m, but you don't want them doing that because they're getting the message from you that it's too sad or too hard for you to talk about. But it's a delicate balance, because it is hard and it can be really sad. And there's no manual for this. You don't get a book about how to do this. And so being able to sort of say, oh, here's a moment. It could be 5-minute conversation. It could be a 3-hour conversation, but being willing actually to go there and be with your child helps also allay fears. You know, we all have all different kinds of fears, and for children to be afraid and to imagine, their imagination is often far worse than some reality. If I can really have this conversation, people are going to be with you. You're not going to be in pain. Those kinds of things that they're worrying about, if they don't have a place to put them, it makes it much scarier. You know, and that's true for us as adults as well, having places to talk about it.
Everyone needs their outlets.
Right.
Everyone in the whole family.
And that includes good outlets too. You know, grief is also about making memories. It's not all sad. We just did a whole thing recently about talking to kids, what's grief? And it's sort of like somebody said desperation, and somebody said depressed, and somebody said sad. And then somebody told a story about, you know, a year later after the person had died, everybody got together in FaceTime, and they all told stories, and they were sad and happy and laughing, and all those pieces were about making memories now, but based on memories that they had when they were anticipating this was going to happen. And that was also grief. And so anticipatory grief includes all the fear and the sadness and the not knowing and the guilt, and opportunities for making memories and for being with in the present that you wouldn't have otherwise.
And then it seems like a lot of times that happens later as well.
Yes.
You make these situations are brought together that maybe wouldn't have happened.
Right.
Because of the anticipation earlier.
Right. And that's where the mastery, it's sort of like if I'm thinking about it, anticipating it, and I'm dealing with it now, then I'm better prepared, not completely prepared, but I'm better prepared, but down the road, it makes a difference.
Right. We've had a few people write in. I just want to check and make sure there's no questions.
Or anything they want us to know.
Yep. There's some links there that you guys can look at that just sort of address some of the specific things that Nancy was talking about in the video library, that we already have other videos from other parents talking about anticipatory grief. Here's another one coming in now. So when thoughts come up where you're visualizing funerals and playing it out in your mind, how you'll react, do you allow yourself to go there, or should you redirect?
So that's a great question. I would suggest that you go there at least a little bit. I call it going to the edge, and then you come back. You kind of go to the edge and you look in, because sometimes what happens is we have incredible dread for the future. What's this going to be like? I don't want to do this. I can't imagine living without this person. I can't even imagine. So you might have to, it's going to come up, and it's going to come up more than once. So going to the edge, sitting in it a little bit, and then being able to say, okay, I'm coming back from the edge, because in this moment, my child isn't dead. In this moment, I'm going to create a memory, or I'm going to do something, or I need to spend time with my other children or my spouse or my family, that we don't want to stay in that the whole time, especially because it's not happening in the moment. It's okay to have it come up, and the feelings are happening in the moment, but the actual event is not. And so how you'll ultimately be, you actually don't know. So being able to pull yourself back from the edge, if you will, is really important. You know, this is all about also thinking about unfinished business. So we have this real dread of sort of going into the future and what's this going to be like, and I don't know if I can do it. You're right, we don't know what it's going to be like, and chances are you will be able to do it with support. And what do I need to do now to take care of myself, which is really, the self-care is really important. And what do I need to do to either take care of others, to give myself a break, to make memories, to do something now in the present that's going to help me and serve me in the future.
Yeah, I think as a parent who's been in that situation, I think the thing that I learned I had to do was just let it happen. Like when I had those feelings and I was worried about those things, I had to face them. I couldn't ignore them. And then when, you know, the rest of the time, it had to be okay to live regular life and to be doing other things. And there are constant little reminders that will keep bringing the topics that you need to sort out will surface.
Right. And sometimes it's okay. You know, sometimes I think what happens is people get really scared when the anticipatory grief comes up, and like, I don't want to go there, I don't want to go there, I don't want to go there. So sometimes it can be helpful to actually prescribe for yourself a time. I'm going to sit down, and for 10 minutes, I'm going to go to the worst place that I can imagine for now. I'm only giving myself 10 minutes, and then I'm done. Then I'm coming back to either being hopeful, or I have to take a bath, or I have to do something for my child, and that's fine. But sometimes the fear of going there is so great that you're going to be overwhelmed, that you're going to be terrified, that you won't know what to do, that you can't handle it. Part of the reasons why you don't want anybody to do this alone. And the other piece of this is if it's really that hard, I agree with you. Sometimes it just comes up. It's not like you get to choose. It just shows up. A song comes on, or you meet somebody in the grocery store and they start talking about graduation, and you're like, that is never going to be my life, or that's not going to be my life with this child. And so sometimes you can't help it. But sometimes when you feel like I don't want to go there, it can be helpful to just set some time aside. It's sort of quiet, reflective time. It's not all about being steeped in the worst, but it might be for 10 minutes, and then come out and see what it was like to actually go there, and know that you can also pull yourself back, because that's going to be really important down the road also in terms of grief after the death. It's horrible, and I'm in it, and I can come back. I can come out, and the rest of my life is also there. It doesn't change what happened, but there's a whole other piece of who I am.
Yeah.
So did something else
There's
pop
a
up
few
on
more.
that?
Well, hi, Lori. Does anybody else have any questions while we're still here live? The recording will be up on Facebook and on the website, so people can watch again later. And you can continue to write questions. Both Nancy and I can respond through the Facebook feed here later as well if you have questions afterwards. Or you can always email us or reach out through Messenger as things come up. And yeah. Anything else you want to add before we sign off?
Only thing I would add, if there are other children and there are siblings, making sure you're including them. The chances are they're also experiencing some fear, worries, perhaps anticipatory grief as well, depending upon how old they are. So some of the conversations we talked about having with the child who's dying may also be important to find out what other people in the family are afraid of, worried about, feeling guilty about. And again, it may show up spiritually, it may show up physically, it may show up emotionally. It's not all going to be talking that you may see, particularly a child reacting. It may happen, it may show up in play, it may show up in not wanting to go to school, but being able to then have a conversation or to think about, I wonder if they're worrying about things in the future the way I am, to be able to have that conversation with them.
Yeah, we just recently added a whole section on child life, and a lot of the videos in there are about working specifically with siblings, and a lot of it is through play or recognizing some of the behavior signs where the siblings do want to have some of these conversations, or opening doors for them to be able to talk about some of these things in a way that's appropriate for them. So there's a lot of good resources there.
Right.
There's some good videos.
Yeah.
There's a couple more people writing in. I don't know if we have any questions. Any tips for how to share or handle with your spouse? I feel like I worry and want to talk about it so much more than him.
So not uncommon.
Yeah, a lot of us feel this
and
way.
Sometimes it's gender-based and sometimes it's not. So, but it varies from, couple to couple. And again, partly you're often in different places, and that's not uncommon, and it's not going to be uncommon down the road either. So after the child dies, often people are grieving in very different ways and in very different times. And one person is feeling really challenged in the moment and maybe needy and sad and wanting to talk, and the other person's like, I can't go there. So one, figuring out whether there's time you can actually come together, and it might be with a professional, it might be with another supportive person, to say we need to actually make time to have these conversations wherever we are in it. But also knowing that because people grieve differently, you may need support from other people. That it's not, you want a couple to be able to work through this and stay together, but sometimes that's really hard and people need different kinds of support.
Yeah, I think that's the thing in reflection that I learned a lot was, at the time I really wanted us to be on the same page. And I did end up getting divorced, but at the time, now I really recognize that we were never going to grieve in the same way. Like, everybody has their own experience of this, and I can really accept that in a different way now that I wish I had known more at the time, that difference was okay and that there's space for both of those reactions. That felt really hard at the time.
Yeah, I do think it's often about creating space that, I don't get what you're going through and I don't feel that way. And that's okay, because there's not a right or wrong in this, which I think is really important. Some people do it better than others and with additional support and sort of acceptance of themselves. But I do think making time to actually sit down and say, and acknowledge early on, we're doing this differently. And often, parents have different relationships with the child who died and different experiences of their own loss history and all kinds of things that then play into how they're doing this. And with anticipatory grief, it means some people are thinking about this a lot and some people are not. And being able to sort of give permission to say, I just need you to know I am thinking about it. It's okay if you're not. I don't need you to be. I mean, sometimes we feel like we need them to be, but being able to sort of say, okay, it's okay that you're not, and I need you to understand that I am. That I need to think about the funeral. I'm imagining all kinds of things. I don't know how I'm going to do this. I'm terrified about if this is going to look like. Where are we going to do this? Some of this is about decision making as well. So some of the things that arise, and you suggested this before, that come out of anticipatory grief also guide you to other things around decision making. So sometimes having a conversation that's less about the fear component and more about and thinking about these things, and I want to do this together. And so I know we're not on the same page, and I know you may not be thinking about them, but here are some of the things. What are we going to do with them? And maybe in that moment you can't, but we need to come back because we're going to have to make some decisions together. And sometimes the anticipatory grief can actually be helpful in helping us to sort some of that out. And it allows sometimes couples to say, I can't go there. I'm okay with, I trust you. Whatever decisions you make are okay. Now, sometimes that can feel like a burden. Like, I don't want to do this myself, right?
Yeah.
But other times it can feel like, okay, we're at a place where I need you to do these things and I can do these things. But I need you to know how I'm feeling.
I think when I felt that, where Kai's dad said, I trust you, you can make these decisions, I felt like such a burden. I didn't hear, but what I didn't hear was, I trust you. Right. I wasn't willing to hear that part at that time. And I think it now in reflection, it is, I can see that, yes, he wasn't able to make those decisions, but he also knew that I was more equipped at that moment because of the knowledge I had, which, you know, it was hard to feel that way at the time, but I can see that now.
And so couples may be doing this really differently. So having, you know, being able to have a conversation sometimes with another person, you know, a professional or somebody at the hospital or part of hospice or whoever you're working with, just to say, we're not even sort of on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
Could somebody neutral sit with us just to hear the two pieces of this? Partly because I don't want to be in this alone, you know, and I don't want you to be in it alone. And sometimes it's, I appreciate you trust me, but down the road, I don't want to feel like I made all these decisions myself, and were they the right ones or not? And I don't want to worry about how you're going to feel about the decisions. Having those conversations ahead of time, this is what anticipation is good for, allows us to look at those things ahead of time and say, okay, here's all the mess, like all this stuff, and we do it differently and we feel differently about it, and we kind of need to look at it because it's going to help us down the road.
Thanks for all the questions, guys. I think there's just some more comments there. I'm not sure if there's any more questions now.
No.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in. And like I said, it'll be up on the Facebook page and on the website. And keep writing in questions.
If you have more questions, don't hesitate to ask.
We can always answer them later. All right. Bye.
Okay, bye. Thank you.